was suspended in 2013 due to the civil war. The country's economy is heavily dependent on crude oil. Now, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta is due to arrive at the White House within the next few minutes for talks with President Donald Trump. Kenya is a key security ally for the U.S. in the fight against terrorism in the Horn of Africa. But the Trump administration is also keen to do more business with Kenya, which has seen in the recent years the rising influence of Chinese trade and investments. Trade was worth more than $1 billion between the two countries last year, and Kenya has been working hard to expand economic ties abroad and also within Africa. Now, it pushed for the adoption of the Continental Free Trade Area, which aims to try and create a single market for the whole African continent. So far, 49 countries have signed up to the initiative, but the biggest country taking an interest in the continent is China. It's by far the biggest investor in Africa, with more than $66 billion in foreign direct investment since 2005. Well, joining us from Carolina is Grant Harris, the CEO of Harris Africa Partners. He was also the principal advisor to President Barack Obama on issues related to Africa between 2011 and 2015. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. There's been very little willingness by Mr. Trump to engage publicly or constructively, if you wish, with African issues. Could this sign be a change of attitude now that you see the third African president visit the White House?
President Trump, as you said, has engaged publicly, but not very constructively so far when it comes to Africa. And his policy has really been characterized more by racial epithets and a lack of engagement. So some are billing today's bilateral meeting as an opportunity to change that and to stake out a more proactive voice when it comes to supporting U.S. companies. I think that security and trade really will top the agenda, but we'll have to see what comes out of it in terms of concrete outcomes.
Why do you think there's a change of mind now?
I don't know that there necessarily is a change of mind. I don't want to overbuild the significance of this meeting. I think it's significant mainly because President Trump has engaged so little to date. In any other administration, this would be an important meeting, but people wouldn't be asking, will this signal a sea change in U.S. policy or a radical shift? I think today, though, there is an opportunity, as I mentioned, and President Kenyatta has clear goals. He's meeting with CEOs while in Washington. He's got a very important diplomatic week coming up, and will be hosting Prime Minister May in Nairobi and then heading to Beijing for a China-Africa summit. From President Trump's perspective, though, if he's not showing any kind of progress, he's going to continue to be criticized for not engaging in the African continent and for losing out on opportunities vis-a-vis China.
So do you think, though, then, that the U.S. can be able to compete with China and regain the #1 sport they had with the continent?
I think that the U.S. absolutely can compete with China. There are a couple of issues that we need to consider. First, it's not all black and white. And Chinese capital is flowing in high numbers to the continent and supporting infrastructure projects. And some of this is great in terms of providing capital where it's needed. But there is a downside because much of this capital is not transparent, and much of it equates to really a debt trap for Kenya, for Djibouti, for other countries that are over-leveraged and then really subordinated to Beijing in terms of its priorities. That said, the United States has a lot to offer. Each of the African leaders that I talk to a person, want greater U.S. investment and want U.S. companies showing up more and more. And U.S. also is military cooperation and other advantages that can be quite beneficial to African states too. So I think the United States has very deep historical relationships that it can leverage and bring to bear, but it does need to step up and really become more active.
Now, one of the main agendas for President Uhuru Kenyatta is the issue of trade. How should he approach the table now, given the fact that America is now more insular, looking inwards?
If I was President Kenyatta, in the bilateral meeting that's taking place right now, I would lean forward and say, President Trump, do you understand that Beijing now holds more than 70% of the bilateral debt for Kenya and over 21% of Kenya's external debt? I think President Trump really needs to understand that there is a competition going on in terms of partnerships and levels of investment, and that as Kenya and other countries are increasingly beholden to Beijing, that's going to translate into political influence, into security cooperation, and other areas that really affect U.S. national security. So I think from President Kenyatta's interest, he really does need to diversify relationships. He's trying to do so. But from President Trump's standpoint, he needs to understand that there are immense economic opportunities on the continent and that China and other countries are much more active in seizing them.
All right, Grant Harris, CEO of Harris Africa Partners, thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. After the break, Peter will be here with all the sports news. Egyptian